Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the second Geo Lecture Series. This is brought to you by the Philippine Geographical Society in partnership with the UP Department of Geography. And this is also part of the 40th anniversary celebration of the UP Department of Geography this year. So my name is Christian Sagin. I am from the Department of Geography in UP, and I will be your host and moderator for today's lecture. But just a few reminders before we proceed. First, kindly keep your microphones on mute during the presentation, and we encourage you to interact by typing your comments and questions in the chat box we have. We will address them in the open forum after the presentation. Also, please note that this meeting is being recorded and it will be made available for viewing after today's event. Before we proceed to the presentation today, let me please welcome Emmanuel Garcia, the President of the Philippine Geographical Society, to give us our opening remarks.
Thank you, Sir Christian. Apologies, I cannot open my camera because of my internet connection. But good afternoon, everyone. It has always been my honor and my pleasure to welcome everyone to our lecture series. This is our second Geo lecture, our monthly sharing of geographical research done by our fellow geographers and allies in the field. This is brought to us by the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography. For those who do not know yet, the Geo is our previously PGS lecture series and Department of Geography webinar series combined into one. And this is also part of the 40th anniversary celebration of the UP Department of Geography. For this afternoon, we are fortunate to have our invited speaker talk to us about the challenges of seaweed farming using a case study in Iloilo Province. We have generated a word cloud from your registration entries, and this includes sustainable, interesting, culture, aquaculture, livelihood. Other entries include risks, multifunctional, laborious, crucial, alternative, potential, and masarap. I hope we are all excited to see how this all tie up with what our invited speaker prepared for this afternoon's lecture. Again, maraming salamat po for joining us. On behalf of the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography, welcome to our second Geo lecture series for 2023.
Okay, thank you, Eman. So allow me to introduce our invited speaker for this lecture. Dr. Edo Andriesse is a professor of development geography at Seoul National University. He teaches a wide range of human geography courses at undergraduate and graduate levels. His research interest is coastal rural development in Southeast Asia, focusing on topics such as upstream seaweed value chains, coastal governance, rural inequality, bonding social capital, and local political economies. So I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, also my colleague and collaborator in various research projects on aquaculture and fisheries in the Philippines. And he will talk about coastal divergence and inequality, a case study of seaweed farming in Iloilo Province. So join me in welcoming Dr. Edo Andriesse.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Christian Saguin, and also thanks very much, President of the Geographical Association or Society of the Philippines, for the opening remarks. So let me share my screen again, and it should work now properly. Clear? Full screen again? Oh. Yeah, I got a note. It's from Zoom. Something wrong. Can you still see the full screen?
Hi, Red. Yeah, I think you need to. Yeah, you could click on the full screen, maybe.
Yeah, I did it already, but no, I can see the full screen now on my screen. I'm not sure what you are seeing.
We can see the PDF file, but I don't think it's full screen yet.
Then let me do it again, see if it's better. Hello? Sorry. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, Edo.
Yeah. So I think
Did you share?
Yeah, I think there was a problem because I was out of Zoom for a little bit. Share again. What about now?
Yes, it's perfect. It's full screen
Okay.
now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry for the start. Something went wrong with my Zoom, I guess. Yeah. So the title of my talk is Coastal Divergence and Inequality, a case study of seaweed farming in Iloilo Province. And I'm really looking forward to hear your ideas and opinions on my talk, since you are, most of you probably are Filipino and I'm not. So of course, I've always looked at the Philippines as an outsider, not as an insider, as a Philippine citizen. So maybe your opinions and perceptions are different compared to mine. Mm. And as Dr. Christian Sagrin already mentioned, I have done a lot of research on the coastal governance. So not only in the Philippines, but also in Thailand and to some extent Indonesia and a little bit Vietnam also with the collaborators. Mm. And I started my research on Iloilo actually about like 8-9 years ago. Actually, I wanted to do research on fisheries, but then I noticed that there was also a lot of seaweeds going on back then. And my first idea to do research there was actually after the typhoon, super typhoon Yolanda, Haiyan, which was very devastating for the Eastern Visayas and Central and Western Visayas. So I wanted to have a look at how the people are doing and coping after this typhoon. So before I start with the Philippines, I'm going to show a few slides and discuss a few slides on coastal challenges. First, a little bit the urban areas and then the rural areas, and then I'll quickly move into the seaweeds. So as many of you probably know, the coastal spaces are very vulnerable to climate change impacts, all kinds of disasters and slow onset trends that can happen and that can have a negative impact on the coastal spaces, such as these typhoons, floods, soil salinization, sinking soils, and of course also the slow but long-term sea level rise. And if we follow the channel News Asia, this news channel from Singapore, they came up with one report a few months ago that 157 million people in tropical Asia now live in areas below 2 meters above sea level. And that is the range where impacts are predicted to be severe, the impact of climate change. Mm. And this number would increase significantly if sea level rise in the coming decades, as they have been forecasted. So, of course, that is a very worrying sign. So many people that are at risk in many countries in tropical Asia. And let's have a look at two examples. Of course, all of you have a very clear picture of what has been going on in Manila. I just for today, I just show here Bangkok and Jakarta, also two very large metropolises in Southeast Asia. And what is very worrying for Bangkok, the metropolitan Bangkok, is that there is not only the sea level rise, but there is also the land subsidence. So according to experts, the land subsidence amounts to 1 to 2 centimeters per year. And it's caused by a number of factors such as uncontrolled underground water extraction, the weight of the urban build-up, intensity and duration of rainfall, and then also the physical geographical nature of the highly compactable clay soil. So everything is quite vulnerable there in Bangkok, but still more skyscrapers are being constructed, more condominiums, lots of tourists come to Bangkok each year. So it doesn't, when you are in Bangkok, it doesn't look like there is a risk, but when there is flooding, when there is heavy rainfall, or when there are storms, we can see the impacts. The floods in Bangkok can be very severe, and every now and then there are these huge floods up until the central business district of Bangkok. Also, one of the airports, Don Mueang Airport, was flooded a few years ago and had to be closed for a while. So these disasters can be quite grave, and it also, if we look at the long-term prospects of Bangkok, we need to be quite worried, actually. For example, if we look at public transport, how to construct subways and other underground construction when we have this very soft clay, and when we have a lot of underground water extraction, and then also for if we look at relationship between the center and periphery, and if we look at how we can achieve a more balanced regional development. Around 1/3 of economic activity is located in Bangkok. But what should be done if there is this combined land subsidence and sea level rise? And what should be done with the economy of Thailand? Should some things be relocated? What are companies going to do? What is the labor going to do? How about transport, etc., etc. So it all looks to me quite worrying when we have this combined effects of land subsidence and sea level rise. And then another large giant metropolis in Southeast Asia is, of course, Jakarta, with 34 million people. And here at the bottom right, you can see a photograph of one of the main squares and roundabouts in Jakarta. So it's also in the heart of the central business district. And it looks like every year or every other year, this place is flooded, also due to rainfall, heavy rainfall and erosion elsewhere. So that's also very difficult for the Indonesian government and the Indonesian people to deal with the annual floods. And then we have also, of course, the vast slums and polluted streams and canals. The water cannot go to the soils because of all this pollution. So the only thing is going downstream to Jakarta. So, as you might know, also here, land subsidence and groundwater. So this is 2010, this is 2030, potential areas with elevations below mean sea level, 2030. So you can see the northern part of Jakarta is at great risk and can be below sea level. Hundreds of thousands of people live there, lots of slums in these areas. So also for Jakarta, it is quite a worrying situation. and some architects, some consultancies, they have said we need to build a giant wall and a protective area or a new land reclamation north of Jakarta to protect the city from flooding and further storms and also from sea level rise. But what is on the cards now, and actually some construction has been started, has started already. It's actually a new capital city. So maybe some of you have followed it in the news. So now the plan is to build a completely new capital city, Nusantara, in East Kalimantan. And I'm not yet convinced whether this would be the best solution to reduce the pressure on Jakarta. Of course, it's only for the government, for the central government. So the president will move there, or one of the future presidents of Indonesia, and then the parliament and a lot of civil servants. But I expect that a lot of the businesses and the firms, the economic activity will largely remain in Jakarta because it's more strategically located, and all the factories and offices are already there. So I'm not yet very convinced that it would be the best solution. And also, of course, there will be so much more CO2 emissions. There will be many flights from between Nusantara and Jakarta for cargo flights and also passenger flights. So it will be very intensive. So it will generate also another way of pollution there with the CO2 emissions. So it's quite different compared to, let's say, maybe Canberra in Australia, or Ottawa in Canada, or Putrajaya in Malaysia, which is also not far from Kuala Lumpur. This new capital is quite far from the existing capital, the old center of Jakarta and surroundings. Now, and then if we look at rural challenges, there are also many recurring monsoon extremes in India. Every year we can read it in the news. The heavy monsoons and rainfall and flooding. Bangladesh, the sea level rise. There's maybe Bangladesh is one of the first countries where we can experience, where people experience already displacement. Many people need to migrate from the coastal areas to Dhaka and other cities because the sea level rise is really unfolding there. Indonesia, the tsunami, which is of course, which was not, of course, not man-made, the 2004 tsunami. Then in Thailand, overfishing, erosion, polluting aquaculture. There was this infamous cases of shrimps aquaculture in the 1990s, and it really polluted many of the coastal areas in Thailand. And then for the Philippines, also a lot of pressure still at the typhoons, and also overfishing and illegal fishing. So what are some of the options to reduce overfishing? And now we delve a little bit more into the coastal spaces. So the oceans are depleted. There is still a huge demand for fish, and actually also a lot of dietary experts say these days we need to eat more fish and less meat. It's better for our health, especially with the omega-3. So there is a continuous demand for fish in many countries all over the world. So there are 4 options to reduce overfishing. That is then the aquaculture, but it has positive and negative consequences. Sustainable fishing practices, which is theoretically and conceptually it is very interesting, but in practice it is also hard to achieve and hard to monitor. It's like how to make sure that everyone adheres to sustainable fishing practices and, for example, does not fish during the close seasons, or how to make sure that fishers are not fishing the young fish, the fishlings, during the seasons of reproduction. Then there is in situ diversification, so trying to come up with different economic activities in the coastal areas, so we can include the seaweeds there too. And ex situ diversification is basically out migration. If people don't see other options to make a living in the coastal spaces, then the only way is to migrate out, either permanently or temporarily. And of course, we have seen that a lot in the Philippines, where there are so many OFWs all over the world. So out migration has been a very strong ex situ diversification strategy for the Philippines. And what I've also find quite worrying is when we look at the Philippine labor markets, is that there is a continuous supply, if you will, or continuous abundance of people who enter the labor market. And we can still see here now the people who were born between 2000 and 2005, let's say, they are now entering the labor market, or sooner or later. And what jobs are they going to have? What jobs can they have? What has been their education? So yeah, I think that is a very serious situation for the Philippines. Also, if you compare it to other countries where the fertility rate has been lower, and also where jobs are easier to come by, especially if we look at Indonesia and Thailand and Vietnam. So Vietnam is now also benefiting from the geopolitical tensions between the US and China. So many companies are relocating to Vietnam. Also, many Korean companies are relocating to Vietnam, like Samsung has set up a lot of factories and offices in Vietnam. So Vietnam is quite booming in terms of foreign direct investment and employment generation. And I don't see that same or similar trends in the Philippines. So the employment generation is harder. So after setting the stage here, now I start with the part 2, Philippine carrageenan seaweeds. So this is very different from the seaweeds that I'm used to here in Korea, the nori seaweeds, or the kim, as the Korean call it. This is just the carrageenan seaweeds that are used as an ingredient, as a binder, a thickener in all kinds of products. So the Philippine seaweeds and also the Indonesian seaweeds, they are an intermediate product, and then the Philippine refineries, they sell it to other companies, mostly abroad, and then those companies, they produce a wide range of products that includes the carrageenan seaweeds. So the seaweeds is used in ice cream, it's used in toothpaste, it is used in all kinds of cosmetic products, such as here the soap and lubricants, moisturizing lubricants. And it can also be used in makeup. In makeup also has this kind of seaweeds. Now these two are the downstream. This is the downstream destination, the downstream part of the seaweeds. This is the upstream part of the seaweeds, where a lot of if we look at the Philippines, a lot of seaweeds is cultivated in Mindanao and Tawi-Tawi, the southern parts and islands there, but also in Palawan and coastal areas, islands of Palawan, and then also in the central Philippines, to a lesser degree. The volumes are a bit lower, like Iloilo, Guimaras, Bohol, and then there's also some production like in places in Sorsogon. Actually, I am now also a consultant for a seaweed project in Sorsogon. So the University of Sorsogon is trying to help the seaweed farmers there as well, but because of typhoons and other things, it's not easy to be very successful. So it needs time. Here we can see a seaweed farmer harvesting his seaweeds. And yeah, there has been quite a significant degree of downstream success. If we look at the exports, especially exports of carrageenan in US dollars, it increased to, let's say, about $200 million in 2014, more than $200 million. But then it's kind of stabilized, so it decreases a bit and then increases a little bit. So now every year it seems to be stabilizing between 150 and $200 million a year. I'm not sure yet what the effect of the pandemic has been on the carrageenan exports. And then the production of seaweed also increased first until 2009, but then there was some decline also due to typhoons and the ice disease of the seaweeds, and also due to the El Nino effect. So there were a couple of factors that led to a decline in seaweeds, but now we can see a gradual increase again. But for the carrageenan refineries, it was not a big problem because they imported a lot of the dried seaweeds from Indonesia. So actually, Indonesia is now the largest producer of dried seaweeds, but a lot of the dried seaweeds ends up in Cebu. So a lot of the Indonesian supply ends up in Cebu and other places, but mostly Cebu. In Cebu, there are the carrageenan refineries, and then so there the seaweeds are refined into carrageenan and then sold to the international markets like Korea, Japan, China, also Spain, other European countries, etc. So we have seen downstream success, but if we look at Central Philippines, upstream stagnation after 2014, the massive increase in Indonesian supply drove down the prices, while the seedling prices increased. So the profit margins became very, very tight and much less than before. Typhoons washed away the seaweeds 2013, and then last year there was also a super typhoon, and of course every year, as we all know, there are typhoons in the Philippines, and then the currents are so strong that the seaweeds are washed away. And then due to El Nino, there was also higher ocean surface temperature, so the seaweeds don't grow very well if the water is hotter than 27, 28 degrees Celsius. So then, the yields are going down. That also led to the decline in production, as I showed you before. And then also when the water is too hot, there is a higher chance of seaweed diseases, and one the most severe is the ice. It's called ice because the seaweeds turn to whitish color, it looks a bit like ice. So that also, then if seaweeds develop ice, then they die off and they cannot be sold anymore to the middleman or the traders. So as a result, from 250,000 growers in 2014, there are only 100,000 left. But that was 2018, so I'm not sure exactly the number of seaweed growers right now, so 5 years later. But it's definitely fewer than 250,000. This is an example of the ice disease. So this particular seaweed could not be sold anymore. So the research questions that I want to address today: how have the livelihoods of seaweed growers changed in Iloilo Province in recent years? What factors determine the pattern of divergence between Estancia and San Dionisio, both in Iloilo Province? And what are the implications for coastal and rural development? So at the top right, you can see the location of the barangays in Estancia here, Gogo and Dagolan, and this is the research site in San Dionisio. So it's a bit more than 100 kilometers from Iloilo City, the main city in Iloilo Province. And bottom right, you can also see the path of the typhoon Yolanda Haiyan of 2013. So exactly passing San Dionisio, actually, and also Concepcion, but Estancia was also really heavily affected. And then for Barangay Gogo, you can see here, after the typhoon, the government decided to construct public housing for the coastal communities, and people also are discouraged to live within 40 meters of the shoreline. But as we will see later, these policies have not really been very successful. So my first round of fieldwork was in early 2015. And these are some of the results from that round of fieldwork. So after the typhoon, the seaweed business more or less collapsed, and so also some of the buyers, some of the traders, they decided to leave Iloilo Province, and only one left. So that means that there was no negotiating power anymore for the seaweed farmers, those who wanted to restart growing seaweeds again, because they could not negotiate prices. They had to accept the price of the single buyer. And also back in 2015, there was no vertical coordination. The seaweed growers were not coordinating anything with stakeholders further up in the value chain of seaweeds, like the traders or the refineries in Cebu or transport. It was more like an isolated value chain. Let's say the stakeholders were quite isolated from each other, and it was very apersonal and not a lot of collaboration and coordination. And also back in 2015, the livelihoods in Estancia were already harsher than in San Dionisio. And so if you want to read more about the results of the 2015 fieldwork, you can consult the article that I wrote together with my collaborator, Zach Lee, and was published in Singapore Journal of Tropical Geography. This one we also included in the paper. We can see the seaweed value chains from the seaweed growers. And at that time in 2015, 1 kilo of dried seaweed could be sold for $1. But here the refined carrageenan was sold for $12 to $15 per kilo. And also the regional monopsony. So that means that there was only one buyer at that time with a substantial influence there. This is an example of the living conditions in Estancia. Now, and then I decided to go back to Iloilo Province in late 2018 and early 2019 because I wanted to know how are the seaweed growers doing. So a couple of years after I went there. So we talked to the same households, but you can see here a major difference. So for San Dionisio, there were 23 growing households growing seaweeds back in 2015, and in early 2019 it was the same. Exactly the same households that we asked. So they were all still doing the seaweeds, and actually the seaweeds became more important for their livelihood. But for Estancia, it was very different. It was so in 2015 we talked to 24 seaweed growers, and then in 2018 we managed to talk to 23 of them, so almost all. But then only 2 were doing seaweeds, and the others quit seaweeds because of all kinds of challenges that I will show you later. And you can also see here the seaweeds, the contribution of seaweeds declined for the livelihoods, and in return, actually, or unfortunately, the people had to return to fishing, and that is exactly what the Philippine government does not like to see, because there has already been so much overfishing. But if seaweeds are not thriving, if there are problems, then the only way for the coastal communities to make a living is go back to fishing. So now I'm going to show you some other patterns of divergence and successes in San Dionisio, and challenges, failures in Estancia. So also San Dionisio is not a very rich community. The seaweed growers are not really rich. You can see here there are also households they're earning less than the poverty threshold, but it's not that bad compared to Estancia, and also compared to other municipalities and places in Iloilo Province. And you can also see the incomes generally also increased between 2015 and 2019. So the average here is about almost 12,000 pesos. Now, if you compare this one to Estancia, it is quite a huge difference, because here you can see the poverty threshold is further to the right, almost to the right. So almost all respondents that we managed to talk to and provided an indication of their income, they actually responded that their income was below the poverty threshold, and also most of them below the food threshold. So the situation there in Estancia is very grave. The average here is 5,000 pesos, almost 5,000 pesos, whereas the average in San Dionisio was 12,000 pesos. So it's quite a big difference there. Now, what are some of the causes for the failure of growing seaweeds in Estancia? So the first thing is the local politics. New association leadership meant new members, new patron-client relationships, changing social and political capital. The old members did not really agree with the new president, and it was a completely new political faction, actually. So everything changed. But some of the new members, they were actually not really experienced seaweed growers, but they just became a member because of the new association leadership. And so there was much less experience within the association, less effective collaboration also to grow seaweeds properly. And then there was also a lack of financial capital to reinvest in seaweeds after the typhoons, not only Yolanda, Haiyan, but also other typhoons. And also as I mentioned before, the price of seedlings increased. So it also became more expensive to actually start growing seaweeds with higher seedling prices. Estancia also suffers from the more polluted waters. So the seaweeds only thrive in clean water. So if there is an oil leakage from a vessel, or if there is a chemical runoff from corn farms higher up, inland in inland areas, then seaweeds also can suffer from that. And that what's also happened in Estancia. And then there was also a lack of the political and financial support from the mayor of Estancia. So there's the first and the fourth factor. We can also link it to local politics, and the World Bank funds of the Philippine Rural Development Program. They did not really end up in the barangays who needed it most. So the result was then a return to fishing. So that we can, something that we can see here, the return to fishing in Estancia, the community, local community, and on the right side, the fish market of Estancia. Now, and very different experiences. There was a lot of success in San Dionisio, more and better horizontal coordination and bonding social capital, people actually working together to improve their seaweed yields, to sell the seaweeds, to harvest the seaweeds, and also to buy the seaweeds, to buy the seedlings. More and better vertical coordination, so the governments were more responsive, and local government units were also really keen to help the people with the seaweeds. And also NGOs. There were also one or two NGOs that have been very active already since 2013-14 to help the people with the seaweeds. In Estancia, there were also NGOs, but they left. And in San Dionisio, they decided to stay longer. Maybe the NGOs also saw more opportunities there. And then the third factor was the more non-marine diversification options. So I mentioned before, San Dionisio was already a little bit better off compared to Estancia. There is people appear to own more land to grow their own vegetables, to grow their own fruit, and maybe some people also grow their own rice and sugarcane and corn. So overall, there is more favorable conditions to earn a living and to switch between activities. So non-marine products and marine products. So people can use savings from, let's say, selling fruits and vegetables to buy the seaweed seedlings. So even the seaweed growers in San Dionisio, they became a little bit well known, and to the extent that people in other places started to buy seedlings from San Dionisio. So here, the seaweed farmers from Naborot Island, they also bought the seaweed seedlings from San Dionisio because it was well known as the high quality seedlings there. So the conclusions: a remarkable process of divergence between livelihood trajectories in San Dionisio and Estancia. Many things went well in San Dionisio, many things stagnated in Estancia, and their people had to return to fishing. So yeah, as a geographer, I am always really interested in these issues of local differentiation. The San Dionisio and Estancia are just 25 kilometers apart, but things have developed in dramatically different ways. So we can look at environmental pressure, social capital formation, local politics. At the local level, many things can be very different. And another conclusion is that overfishing cannot be reduced by a single diversification effort. Because of all the uncertainties these days, we cannot say, oh, let's do all seaweeds, or let's do all, let's say, collecting shells or crabs, or let's do all cultivating salt. Right? We need to have more other options and not only a single diversification offered because it can fail. So yeah, of course, then coastal diversification is easier said than done. And also, what are the implications? So the market-based solutions are not always effective, especially when we have very skewed value chains. If traders and middlemen have too much power, or if there is only one buyer of products, then the market-based solutions can be very detrimental. So I also read this news about the onion trade in the Philippines these days. It's also very problematic, and agents and traders in the onion value chain, they make a lot of money, while onion growers, the onion farmers, suffer. So that's also a big problem these days in the Philippines. And yeah, if seaweeds do not do well, if we cannot continue with seaweeds, maybe we need to find something else, like focusing on food security, because we cannot really eat those seaweeds. It can be used for a little bit for salads or snacks, but it's not a staple. We cannot use it to feed people properly. So we need to focus more on food security, or inclusive marine protective areas, and trying to experiment more with sustainable fishing practices. So I think, yeah, if seaweeds do not do well, then we need to find something else, and not stick to it too long. Yeah, and then, as I mentioned before, there was on the Google map, you could see this public housing, but actually not many people want to live there. The house units are quite small, especially if families have 3, 4, 5 children. Often the water supply and electricity supply is not sufficient or not regular, and there is also no livelihood there. People actually want to go back to the coast to do fishing, because that is what they have been doing for decades. So there are also not alternative livelihoods in the public housing, even though the distance is not far. It's not long distance, but most coastal household, they just want to basically live on the shoreline, typhoons or no typhoons. So that is also quite a serious issue that need to be tackled further. Also, banking on social capital formation without looking at asymmetrical power relationships is very inefficient. We saw that from the Estancia, where new leadership, new patron-client relationships can change things, and unfortunately for Estancia, it was not good for the seaweed productivity there. And then, for those of you who are interested in sustainable livelihoods approach, that is one approach in development studies. It focuses quite a lot on social capital, but we also need to take into account much more seriously the local political capital. So if we analyze value chains and sustainable livelihoods, we need to focus more on the local political capital as well. And yeah, yesterday I saw something in Channel News Asia about youngsters who were experimenting with seaweeds to use as a biodegradable product. So maybe young generations can find better solutions to use seaweeds in a way that contributes to the environmental preservation in Southeast Asia. So in this case, it's not for carrageenan, but to reduce the plastic waste. So you can also consult that article later. And if you want to read more about my presentation, you can also consult this article that was published in Asia Pacific Policy Studies. It also describes the differences between Estancia and San Dionisio. And it's an open access journal. so everyone can download it for free. So that was my presentation, and perhaps there are some questions and points of critique. Should I stop sharing or keep it shared for a while?
Yes, you can stop sharing, Edo. It's fine. Thank you. All right. Again, I would like to thank Dr. Edo Andriesse for sharing with us his research, current and past research on seaweed. So seaweed is a very interesting thing in a way, because it's different from other forms of aquaculture, and we can see how geography matters in the kinds of development, livelihood trajectories in the case of the two towns in Iloilo. So at this point, we would like to proceed to the open forum, and if anyone has any questions or comments or anything you would like to share, you may use the Zoom chat box to type your questions or comments, or you may raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged before you speak and talk about your question. So we will be waiting for your questions if you have. All right. So while waiting for questions from our audience, Edo, so there was although this is not part of your Iloilo research, but I was interested about the carrageenan processing in Cebu. Could you tell us a bit more about who owns those processing plants or refineries, and how did they come to have that much power in the value chain of seaweeds? Not only the Philippines, but you mentioned even from Indonesia, some of the seaweeds are processed there.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit unknown in the world, but if you ask me nowadays what is made in the Philippines, I think one of the very successful products for the last couple of years has been this carrageenan. I have not done extensive research on the history of why they have become so successful, but as far as I know, they are mostly Chinese Filipinos entrepreneurs, and they have they saw an opportunity in the carrageenan industry. I think in the past it started also with some collaboration from Hawaii. There was also some laboratory analysis and some research, and then the entrepreneurs they started to set up their refineries in Cebu because of the strategic location. And so it was for Mindanao. Of course, there was a lot of production in Mindanao and southern Mindanao and Tawi-Tawi, but for the refineries, it's not really strategically located, because the refineries also need to import some other raw materials from other places, and also even from abroad, to refine the carrageenan. And then also for export, it's easier if it's in Cebu than in Mindanao. So I think that was they thought, well, that is the most strategic location. And one reason why they are so influential is that they don't buy in small quantities from the farmers. So there are no direct linkages between the farmers and the refineries. They only buy in bulk, in large quantities, from traders, intermediaries, middlemen, so that they are, the farmers, the seaweed growers, they are quite vulnerable because they cannot negotiate that much. And the refineries say, well, we need large quantities, otherwise we cannot produce carrageenan. So we only buy from people who offer large quantities, and then they can also sell it. I mean, they can also buy it from a lower price than just buy it from the seaweed growers. And I also know that actually the BFAR, the Bureau of Fisheries in the Philippines, and also some NGOs, they actually want to achieve higher prices for the growers. But the refineries, of course, they don't want it. They try to buy it at a lower price. So it's a problematic situation, the different interests within the seaweed value chain. So the Schoenberg is one of the biggest, if you want to look it up, the Schoenberg company. Yeah.
Schoenberg, okay. Thanks, Edo. We have a question from Grass. May I know where in Sorsogon is the seaweed farm? So I'm curious to know as it's our hometown. Maybe talk about your recent Sorsogon trip.
Yeah. Well, I forgot the name of the place. There are various places. Like Pilar. Does it ring a bell? Pilar.
Yeah, Pilar. Yeah.
There's one. But I need to look at the map again to find the municipalities and the barangay. Yeah, I forgot the names right now of the specific places other than Pilar. I can tell you later.
Yeah. Edo, can you tell us a bit about the situation of seaweed farming in Sorsogon? I know there's like challenges to developing a seaweed farm in that area.
Yeah. So actually, when I was there, there was just a typhoon that struck that area of the Philippines. You actually warned me for the typhoon just before I came to the Philippines. So that typhoon also destroyed many kilos of seaweeds in Sorsogon. So yeah, it was very unfortunate for those who tried to start their seaweed business again. So actually in Sorsogon, the main problem, as I see, is the low volumes. The volume of production is much lower compared to even Bohol, or let alone Palawan and Tawi-Tawi. So then if the volumes are low, there is also not much negotiating power, and they can only sell it to middlemen. And in this case, often the seaweed ends up in Cavite or Manila. There are also a few refineries, one or two. But yeah, the low volumes make it quite vulnerable. And then when there is a harvest failure or a typhoon, then there is no production at all. And so then in Sorsogon, there is also some experiments with trying to move away from the carrageenan part, but trying to use the seaweeds for crackers or seaweed candies or seaweed biscuits or seaweed souvenirs, like trying to diversify the end product. But it's also a problem with the low volume. Who is going to buy it, and where to sell it, and how to market it if the volumes are quite low. So I think places like Iloilo and Sorsogon and Guimaras and a few others, they are quite interesting to compare because actually the volumes are relatively low. So it makes it harder to have a sustained a sustained cycle of seaweed production that can be used and can be diversified into different end products. And so the situation is much more favorable in Palawan and Mindanao, where the volumes are huge, and also in some islands off the coast of Antique, there are huge volumes. So it's like much more productive and much more attractive.
Yes, thanks, Edo. We have one more question from Dr. Jake Kadag. He asks, can you give us an idea on the prices of seaweed? How is the price of seaweed actually determined? Or who determines the price? Does it also follow that mysterious law of supply and demand?
Yeah, there is also this part of the invisible hand of Adam Smith, the global demand for seaweeds, for carrageenan, I should say. That is the biggest factor. So it's the law of supply and demand holds there too. Then based on that, the refineries in Cebu, they have a pretty influential role. They can then say, okay, I'm going to set the price this and this to the middleman and the traders, and in turn the traders and the middleman, they also want to make a profit, so then they set the price for the farmers, the seaweed growers. So there is very little negotiating space. There have been efforts of associations and also a few cooperatives to get rid of the long value chain and to, let's say, trying to sell more directly to the refineries and achieve a fairer price. But it has been very difficult, and until now, I think not very successful. I think most seaweed growers still receive a very low price for their fresh seaweeds or dry seaweeds. And there has not been anything like a central government intervention to set the price or guarantee minimum prices. Things like that have not been applied. I also don't know right now if that would be the best solution. If you look at Thailand, the rubber prices or the rice prices, there's been a lot of government intervention, but also sometimes not very successful.
Yeah, thanks, Edo. That's, I think, a matter for BFAR or DA, I think, needs to be addressed.
But I think, let's say, if there is a little bit more effort from the government to support associations and cooperatives to get rid of some of the middlemen and the traders, and to try to convince the refineries that they need to buy it at a bit higher price, I think there is still some more effort can be done there. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so do you have any more questions? Perhaps you could, Edo, could you talk a bit about, you mentioned the two towns, San Dionisio, and Estancia. How would you say seaweed farming transformed kind of the agrarian relations in those two towns? If it did it make it more unequal, or did you see people becoming wealthier? Did it improve agrarian kind of equality in those two areas, or compared to fishing, for example?
Well, yeah, again, I think there is this process of divergence between Estancia and San Dionisio. So people in San Dionisio made profits from the seaweeds, and the seedlings are quite healthy there. There's enough availability of the seedlings. So they are moving a little bit up the ladder of the socio-economic ladder. And I think it's what I observed is especially in terms of education, that the people say, okay, we are making profits from seaweeds, and we are saving money, and we can use it to educate our children better. So some of the families, they can enter maybe lower middle class status, something like that. Family members with better education, they can find a job in Iloilo City, or even some of them becoming an OFW and find work abroad. So there is more this intergenerational thing that happens. In Estancia, I think not much has happened because of the low profits and the collapse of the seaweed. So there, I think we haven't seen any change in agrarian relations. But one thing that I have not done yet research on, I think that would be also interesting to see, is whether the people in San Dionisio actually buy land, for example, to how the land relations are changing there, because actually in both cases most people don't really own the land, but in San Dionisio it's better. But now, since they are doing better in terms of their livelihoods, are they buying more land, and is the land inequality going down or not? That I think would also be interesting to see. And it would also be an interesting bridge from coastal issues to land issues.
Yeah. So we have a question from David. I'm sorry, I think I missed it. Why have the numbers of families surveyed in Estancia farm seaweed dropped to just 2 from 23?
Yeah, I think I explained that during the presentation. It's related to the physical geography of Estancia. The waters are not clean, less clean than San Dionisio, so it's from the start harder to grow seaweeds productively, because seaweeds only thrive in clear waters. And then the other factor is local politics. There was a change in the leadership of associations. New members came, but the new members are not so experienced in seaweeds, and also some of them not really interested in seaweeds. And then there was also the problem of the lack of finance. So then it was harder to buy the seedlings, also given that the price of seedlings went up in the Philippines. So yeah, a range of factors that determined there that they did not restart their seaweeds.
Yeah, thanks, Edo. So I think the physical conditions are very important, especially in the case of seaweeds, because they grow in specific environments. So if it's not conducive to seaweed farming, then it would also fail. And that also intersects with changes in the political capital, social capital in the area as well.
Yeah. So maybe you remember this Guimaras spillover. There was a Guimaras oil leakage a couple of many years ago now. That also really affected the seaweed growers of Guimaras. So they had to stop for a couple of years, actually. And then during that time, the seaweed cooperative also collapsed. So there was a cascading effect from the spillover, the oil problem, to also problems in the value chain of the seaweeds, association cooperatives that collapse, and then even one of these cooperative leaders ran away. They ran away with some of the funds of the cooperative. So it was very problematic there.
Yeah, thanks. Edo. Do you just a follow-up question to that? So, are there kind of particular uses of the sea or the coast that conflict with seaweeds? For example, tourism or other forms of extraction, like fishing. Do they have conflicts with seaweed farming in the case of using of space, or maybe quality of water issues, things like that?
Well, in San Dionisio and Estancia, it was only sometimes the conflict of transportation. Where do the boats, how do the boats need to go? The fishing vessels and other vessels, because many people, they used to have these spaces for seaweeds. But then when people recognized, or also when the local government recognized there could be a tension between growing seaweeds and transportation, they instructed the seaweed associations to have to manage the seaweed spaces better, and also to create maps and to designate seaweed spaces, and then so that it was easier for the fisher folk to see, okay, we can travel with using this lane so that we don't destroy the seaweeds. But there is not a lot of tourism, so it did not interfere. There's no tourism, and so in general it was not a big problem. Not a lot of conflicts, and was managed quite well. This is little bit different, but yeah, it's again related to the pollution. So if a fishing vessel leaked oil, or if some people also they throw away the garbage from the fishing vessels into the ocean, and then things like that. That sometimes there are discussions about how to try to reduce the pollution in the waters.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Edo. I guess we have no more questions. With that, we would like to end our lecture for today. So thank you everyone for coming and participating in the discussion. Thank you, Edo, for giving us kind of a bit of an understanding about seaweed, which is an important but often invisible or ignored crop in the Philippines. So I think it's the most, in terms of production, it's the most produced farm aquatic product in the Philippines. Thank you. And now we will proceed with presenting the certificate of appreciation to our speaker. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you have a certificate. So we'd like to thank Dr. Edo Andriesse for his valuable insights and expertise shared as virtual research speaker for the talk Coastal Divergence and Inequality, a case study of seaweed farming in Iloilo Province as part of the Geo Lecture Series 2023, held today on February 27, 2023, signed Dr. Joseph Palis, Chair of the UP Department of Geography, and Professor Emmanuel Garcia, President of the Philippine Geographical Society. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for the certificate and the attention.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us today and for sharing. Just a few announcements before we go. So this is, again, the second in many lectures that we have for this semester. So the next lecture will be, I think, in a week or so, by Philippe Rikachevitz on radical experimental practices in cartography, and John Rennie Short will present on March 17 on urban ecologies in Manila, and Irene Andal on what if children created a fictional city on March 31st. So we hope you could join us for these upcoming lectures in the series. Also, our past lectures are all stored in the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. You can visit our channel to watch our previous lectures, as well as other recorded events of the Philippine Geographical Society and the Department of Geography. And before we finish,